The Montana sky stretched endlessly above, a tapestry of indigo and amber as sunset painted the rugged landscape. On that crisp September evening in 1891, the distant mountains stood like silent sentinels, watching over the vast wilderness where a woman's desperate journey was about to intersect with a destiny she never imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Elena Blackwood clutched the worn leather map in one hand, the other arm cradling a small, trembling bundle of white and brown fur against her chest. Her once fine traveling dress was torn at the hem, caked with 3 days' worth of dust and desperation. The baby goat bleated softly, its wide eyes reflecting the same fear that had driven them both into this unforgiving territory. "Just a little further, Maple," she whispered to the kid, her voice hoarse from thirst. "We'll find water soon." But as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the prairie, Elena's confidence wavered. The map, hastily purchased from a questionable source in Billings, seemed to mock her, with its vague landmarks and fading ink. 26 years of carefully planned life had not prepared her for this moment. Lost in the wilderness, her carefully constructed future shattered, with only a stolen baby goat and a dubious map to guide her. The irony might have made her laugh, if exhaustion hadn't claimed every spare ounce of her energy. The distant sound of running water pulled her forward, one agonizing step after another. When she finally crested the small rise and saw the creek below, glistening in the fading light, tears sprang to her eyes. Maple sensed her relief, wiggling in her arms with renewed energy. "All right, little one," Elena murmured, making her way down the slope. "Water first, then we'll figure out where we are." She knelt by the creek, allowing Maple to drink while she consulted the map once more. The folds were worn thin from constant handling, certain landmarks circled in faded pencil, homestead opportunities in Montana territory, her last hope for independence after everything that had happened in Boston. So lost was she in studying the map that she didn't notice the approaching rider until his shadow fell across the paper. Elena startled, clutching Maple protectively as she scrambled to her feet. The man sat atop a dappled gray horse, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. For a terrifying moment, Elena feared she'd been found, that somehow Edward had sent men after her this far west. Her hand instinctively moved to the small Derringer pistol concealed in her pocket. "Creek's public land, ma'am," the man said, his voice deep but not unkind. "But you're about half a mile onto Silverleaf Ranch property." Elena swallowed hard, trying to gather her composure. "I apologize for trespassing. I was following this map and must have taken a wrong turn." She attempted to sound confident, like a woman who belonged in this wild country, rather than what she was. A schoolteacher from Boston who'd fled in the night with embezzled funds and a stolen goat. The man dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. He kept a respectful distance, but Elena could see him better now. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. Not young, perhaps in his mid-30s, with eyes the color of the creek water, clear, deep, and impossible to read. "That's quite a traveling companion you've got there," he remarked, nodding toward Maple, who was now attempting to chew on the corner of the map. Despite everything, Elena felt a small smile tug at her lips. "This is Maple. She's all I have left." Something in her voice must have communicated more than her words, because the man's expression softened slightly. "Name's Nathan Hawkins. This is my land you're wandering across." "Elena Blackwood," she replied, deciding truth was safer than invention in this moment. "I was headed toward Willow Creek Settlement. The man who sold me this map said there were homesteading opportunities there." Nathan's brow furrowed. Willow Creek's still another day's journey, and it's rough country between here and there. Not the kind a woman should cross alone, especially with night coming on. Elena bristled at the assessment, however accurate it might be. "I've managed this far." "That you have," he acknowledged with a slight nod, "but your little friend there looks about done in, and so do you, if you don't mind my saying."
If on cue, Maple sagged against Elena's chest, the kid's brief burst of energy fading with the daylight. Elena felt her own knees threatening to buckle, 3 days of minimal food and rest catching up with her all at once. Nathan seemed to notice her swaying stance. "My ranch house is about 2 miles back. There's a spare room where you and your kid can rest up. Tomorrow, I can point you toward a safer route to Willow Creek." Elena hesitated, years of careful propriety warring with immediate necessity. "I couldn't impose. Not an imposition, just neighborliness." His tone was matter-of-fact, without a hint of the condescension she'd grown so accustomed to from men in Boston. "Weather's turning, besides. See those clouds to the west? That's mountain weather moving in, and it waits for no one." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Elena glanced at the darkening horizon, then down at Maple's exhausted form, and finally at the map that had led her so far astray. Her options were severely limited. "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. We accept your offer of shelter for the night." Nathan nodded once, then turned to his horse. "Can you ride? It'd be faster than walking." When Elena nodded, he lifted Maple from her arms with surprising gentleness, then helped Elena mount before handing the kid back to her. With practiced ease, he swung up behind her, maintaining a respectful distance, while still steadying her with one hand. As they rode through the gathering dusk, Elena found herself studying the map over Maple's sleeping form, wondering how her careful plans had gone so awry. "That map's not worth the leather it's drawn on," Nathan commented after watching her for a while. "Whoever sold it to you took advantage." Elena sighed, folding it carefully despite its apparent worthlessness. "It was all I could afford. And it's the only guide I have." Something in her voice must have resonated with him, because he was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Maps can lead you astray as easy as guide you true," he said finally. "Depends on who drew them and why." The philosophy struck Elena as oddly fitting for her current circumstances. Her entire life had been mapped out by others. Her father, her finishing school teachers, and finally Edward Prescott, the banker's son whose proposal had seemed like security until she discovered the cruelty behind his polished facade. The landscape opened up as they crested a ridge, revealing a valley below where a sturdy log house stood sentinel alongside a large barn and several outbuildings. Lamplight glowed warm from the windows, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. "Silverleaf Ranch," Nathan announced. "Nothing fancy, but it keeps the weather out and the warmth in." To Elena, accustomed to Boston's crowded streets and Edward's ostentatious family mansion, the homestead with its backdrop of mountains and open sky seemed almost unreal in its beauty, like an illustration from one of the dime novels she'd secretly read as a girl. As they approached, a dog's bark announced their arrival. A border collie raced from the porch, followed by an older man who stepped out, rifle in hand. "It's just me, Roy," Nathan called out. "And we've got guests for the night." The older man lowered his rifle, eyeing Elena and Maple with undisguised curiosity, as Nathan helped them dismount. "Miss Blackwood, this is Roy Donovan, my foreman and the closest thing to civilization you'll find at Silverleaf," Nathan said with a hint of wry humor. "Roy, Miss Elena Blackwood, and her companion Maple are staying the night. They're bound for Willow Creek tomorrow." "Ma'am," Roy nodded, his weathered face creasing into a polite smile. "And, little ma'am," he added, with a glance at Maple, who had awakened and was studying her new surroundings with alert interest. "I'll show you to the spare room," Nathan said, leading the way toward the house. "Roy, can you see to Starlight and maybe find something for the kid to eat?" "Got some alfalfa that might suit her," Roy replied, already reaching for the horse's reins. The interior of the ranch house surprised Elena. While rustic, it was clean and well-ordered, with simple but quality furnishings. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, bookshelves lined another, and through a doorway she glimpsed a tidy kitchen. "My mother had definite ideas about how a home should be kept," Nathan explained, noticing her assessment. "Some habits stick, even 15 years after she's gone." He showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom off the main living area. "Washrooms through that door there, kitchens down the hall. Make yourself at home while I help Roy get your little friend settled for the night." Elena found herself alone for the first time since their encounter at the creek. The exhaustion she'd been fighting hit her like a physical blow. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the enormity of her situation threatening to overwhelm her. 3 weeks ago, she had been a respectable schoolteacher in Boston with a secure future. Now she was a fugitive with stolen money, a purloined goat, and a worthless map. The tears came then, silent but relentless, until a soft knock at the door forced her to compose herself. "Miss Blackwood?" "Supper's ready if you're feeling up to it," Nathan called through the door. Elena quickly wiped her eyes, smoothed her hair, and straightened her travel-worn dress as best she could. "Thank you. I'll be right there." The kitchen was warm and fragrant with the smell of beef stew. Roy had returned from the barn and was washing up at a basin near the door. Nathan stood at the stove, ladling stew into bowls. "Nothing fancy," he said, setting a bowl before her at the scrubbed wooden table. "But it's hot, and there's plenty of it." The simple meal was better than anything Elena could remember tasting, though that might have been the hunger talking. As they ate, Roy and Nathan discussed ranch matters, cattle that needed moving to higher pasture, a fence section requiring repair, a mare about to foal. Normal, everyday concerns that seemed wonderfully mundane after the chaos of Elena's recent days. "How's the little goat settling in?" she asked when there was a lull in their conversation. "Made herself right at home in the barn," Roy chuckled. "Got her bedded down with fresh straw, and she's had a proper meal. Spirited little thing, ain't she?" "She is," Elena agreed, relief washing through her. "She's been through a lot." "If you don't mind my asking," Nathan said, his tone careful, "it's not common to see a lady traveling alone in these parts, especially with a baby goat in tow. You running from something, or toward something." The question, though gently asked, struck too close to home. Elena set down her spoon, considering how much to reveal. These men had shown her nothing but kindness, but her recent experiences had taught her caution. "Perhaps a bit of both," she admitted finally. "I was a schoolteacher in Boston. Circumstances changed, and I decided the West offered better opportunities." "And the goat?" Roy asked, curiosity evident in his voice. Elena smiled despite herself. "Maple belonged to my landlady's daughter. The child loved her, but her mother insisted the goat had to go. Said she was too destructive for city living. They were going to sell her to a butcher." She stroked the map that she'd kept close, now resting beside her bowl. "When I decided to leave, I couldn't bear to think of what would happen to her, so she came with me. She didn't mention the money she'd taken from Edward's desk drawer, the funds he'd set aside for their honeymoon, before she discovered his true nature. Theft was theft, no matter how she justified it, and these men had no reason to harbor a criminal." Nathan studied her for a moment, then nodded as if she'd confirmed something for him. "Well, you and Maple are welcome to rest here tonight. Tomorrow's soon enough to decide what comes next." After supper, Elena insisted on helping with the dishes despite their protests. The familiar, mundane task steadied her, and by the time they finished, her eyelids were growing heavy. She excused herself, checked on Maple one last time in the barn, and then retired to the small bedroom. As exhausted as she was, sleep proved elusive. Elena found herself studying the map by lamplight, tracing the route to Willow Creek with her finger. Even if the map was flawed, it was her only guide to a possible future. The homesteading opportunity represented her last chance at genuine independence, something she had realized she valued above all else after her near-disastrous engagement. A soft knock at her door roused her from these thoughts. "Miss Blackwood, may I speak with you a moment?" Nathan's voice was low, mindful of the late hour. Elena quickly wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened the door a few inches. "Yes, Mr. Hawkins?" He stood in the hallway, still fully dressed, holding a more detailed map than her own. "I've been looking at the routes to Willow Creek. The trail's been washed out in several places from the spring floods. It's not impossible, but it's no journey for a woman alone. Elena felt her hopes sink. I see, but I must get there. The land office won't have anything worth claiming, Nathan finished for her. Roy rode through Willow Creek last month. The good parcels were claimed years ago, and what's left is either too rocky to farm or too far from water to be viable. Elena leaned against the doorframe, suddenly dizzy with disappointment. Oh. Nathan's expression was sympathetic but direct. I didn't want to say this at supper with Roy there, but I suspect whoever sold you that map knew exactly what they were doing. Willow Creek's become something of a scheme. Land agents selling maps and dreams to Easterners who don't know any better. The confirmation of her mistake was a bitter pill. Elena closed her eyes briefly, gathering her composure. Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Hawkins. I'll need to reconsider my plans. There's something else, Nathan said, hesitating slightly. While you were seeing to Maple earlier, a rider came through with news. There are inquiries being made in Billings about a woman traveling with a baby goat. Apparently, she's wanted for theft. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. So Edward had pursued her, even this far. The money she'd taken would be insignificant to him. This was about control, about not letting her escape his influence. I see, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathan studied her face for a long moment. I don't know your full story, Miss Blackwood, and I'm not asking for it. But if you're in some kind of trouble, perhaps you should consider your options carefully before rushing off to Willow Creek or anywhere else. Elena nodded, unable to form a coherent response as panic threatened to overwhelm her. Get some rest, Nathan said gently. Things often look clearer in the morning light. After he left, Elena sank onto the bed, the worthless map clutched in her trembling hands. She was trapped, her planned destination a mirage, pursuit closing in behind her, and limited funds that wouldn't last long in a strange territory. Outside her window, the wind picked up, bringing with it the first spatters of rain against the glass. The storm that Nathan had predicted was arriving, much like the storm that had engulfed her carefully ordered life. With nowhere else to turn, Elena unfolded her map once more, tracing the route that had led her to this moment, to Silverleaf Ranch and a quiet man with creek water eyes who had offered shelter without demands. The map might be worthless for finding Willow Creek, but it had led her here, to this unexpected sanctuary. As exhaustion finally claimed her, Elena's last conscious thought was of Nathan's words. Maps can lead you astray as easy as guide you true. Depends on who drew them and why. For the first time in weeks, she slept without dreaming of pursuit, the map and Maple's small form beside her bed, the only connections to a life she was increasingly certain she could never reclaim. Morning came with startling brightness, the storm having passed during the night, leaving the world washed clean. Elena woke to the unfamiliar sounds of ranch life, the distant lowing of cattle, the clatter of activity in the barn, the cheerful barking of the border collie. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then reality rushed back. The failed map, Nathan's warning about Willow Creek, and worst of all, the news that someone was making inquiries about a woman with a baby goat. Elena dressed quickly in her travel-worn clothes, folded the map out of habit, and went to check on Maple. She found the kid contentedly munching hay in a small pen inside the barn, looking more lively than she had in days. Roy was nearby, brushing down a chestnut mare. "Morning, Miss Blackwood," he called cheerfully. "Your little friend there's made herself right at home. Been entertaining the barn cats since dawn." Sure enough, two tabby cats sat watching Maple with fascinated attention as the kid pranced around her enclosure, occasionally standing on her hind legs as if showing off. "She seems much improved," Elena agreed, relief washing through her. At least one of them was thriving. "Boss is up at the north pasture," Roy informed her. "Said to tell you there's coffee and biscuits keeping warm in the kitchen, and to make yourself at home. He'll be back midday." Elena thanked him and returned to the house, where she found the promised breakfast. As she ate, she tried to formulate a plan. Willow Creek was no longer an option, but she couldn't stay at Silverleaf Ranch indefinitely. Eventually, whoever was asking questions in Billings would widen their search. She needed a new destination, somewhere Edward's influence couldn't reach. After breakfast, restlessness drove her outside. The ranch spread before her, bathed in morning light. Beyond the immediate buildings, she could see cattle grazing on distant hillsides and the silver thread of a stream winding through the valley. The beauty of it struck her anew, so different from Boston's crowded streets and social constraints. Without consciously deciding to, Elena found herself walking toward a small rise behind the house, Maple's map tucked in her pocket. The climb was gentle, and when she reached the top, she was rewarded with a view that took her breath away: mountains in the distance, the ranch buildings below, and miles of open country in between. Elena settled on a sun-warmed rock and unfolded her map once more. It might be worthless as a guide to Willow Creek, but perhaps she could use it to find another destination. As she studied it, tracing the crude lines with her finger, a shadow fell across the paper. "Beautiful view, isn't it?" Nathan asked, dismounting from his horse. He must have returned early from the north pasture. "It's magnificent," Elena agreed, instinctively starting to fold the map away. "May I?" Nathan asked, gesturing toward the map. When she hesitated, he added, "I know this territory. Might be able to help you find a better destination than Willow Creek." Reluctantly, Elena handed him the map. Nathan studied it briefly, then shook his head. "This isn't just inaccurate, it's deliberately misleading. See here?" He pointed to a river marked on the map. "That's drawn completely wrong. If you'd followed this all the way to Willow Creek, you'd have hit impassable terrain." Elena sighed, the last of her hopes fading. "So, I've been following a false path from the beginning." "Not entirely," Nathan said thoughtfully. "It led you here, after all." The simple observation caught her off guard. "Yes, I suppose it did." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, looking out over the ranch. Finally, Nathan spoke again. "Miss Blackwood, Elena, I have a proposition for you." As dawn broke over Silverleaf Ranch, Elena stood on the porch beside Nathan, watching the approaching riders. During the night, Roy had returned with 3 neighboring ranchers, weathered men with grim expressions and rifles resting casually across their saddles. They formed a loose semicircle in front of the house, a silent statement of solidarity that brought a lump to Elena's throat. "You've got good friends," she murmured to Nathan. "Out here, neighbors look after each other," he replied simply. "It's how we survive." Maple bleated softly from behind Elena's skirts, the kid seemingly sensing the tension in the air. Elena reached down to stroke her silky head, drawing comfort from the animal's steadfast presence. "Whatever happens," Nathan said quietly, "let me do the talking at first. These men respect property rights above all else. The fact that you're working for me gives you a certain standing." Elena nodded, squaring her shoulders as the riders came into clear view: Sheriff Mills, George Walsh, and 2 deputies. They reined in their horses at the sight of the assembled ranchers, clearly not expecting such a reception. "Morning, Hawkins," Sheriff Mills called, tipping his hat. His gaze slid to Elena, narrowing in recognition. "And Miss Blackwood, I presume?" "Sheriff," Nathan acknowledged with a nod. "What brings you to Silverleaf at this early hour?" Mills gestured toward Walsh. "This gentleman has some questions for the lady." George Walsh urged his horse forward, his Boston attire now dusty from the journey but his demeanor still oozing entitlement. "Elena," he said, his tone a mixture of relief and condescension that made her skin crawl, "thank goodness we've found you. Everyone has been terribly worried." "I doubt that," Elena replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Edward sent you to bring back his money, not out of concern for my welfare." Walsh's expression hardened. "You're not well, Elena. Your behavior, running away, stealing, this bizarre attachment to a farm animal, it all points to a serious nervous condition. Edward is prepared to forgive your indiscretions if you return to Boston immediately." One of the neighboring ranchers spat contemptuously into the dirt. "Lady seems perfectly sound of mind to me." "With respect, sir, you're hardly qualified to make that assessment," Walsh replied coldly. "Miss Blackwood requires proper medical attention and the guidance of her fiancé." "Former fiancé," Elena corrected firmly. "Our engagement ended the moment I discovered Edward's true character." Walsh sighed dramatically. "You see, Sheriff? Delusions, paranoia. This is precisely why we need to bring her home." Sheriff Mills looked uncomfortable, glancing between Elena and Walsh. "Mr. Hawkins, I understand Miss Blackwood is working for you now." "She is," Nathan confirmed. "Has been for nearly 2 weeks. Best bookkeeper Silverleaf's ever had." "And the alleged theft?" Mills pressed. Before Walsh could respond, Elena stepped forward. "I took $500 that Edward had set aside for our honeymoon. Money he'd promised would be mine to manage once we were married." "It wasn't yours to take," Walsh interjected sharply. "Perhaps not legally," Elena conceded. "But when a man traps a woman into marriage through lies and threats, when he speaks of her as property to be acquired, I'd say there's a moral debt that exceeds any financial one." One of the neighboring ranchers nodded approvingly, and even Sheriff Mills seemed to be considering her words. "That's a compelling speech, Miss Blackwood," the sheriff said finally. "But the law doesn't recognize moral debts. If Mr. Prescott chooses to press charges—" "He won't," Nathan interrupted confidently, "because that would require a public trial where Miss Blackwood could testify about Mr. Prescott's character and behavior. I doubt a man so concerned with his reputation would want that." Walsh's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. You're taking the word of a disturbed woman over that of one of Boston's most respected citizens." "I'm taking the word of a woman who's proven herself honest and hard-working," Nathan replied evenly. "Who came to Montana seeking a fresh start just like most of us did?" "This isn't about fresh starts," Walsh snapped. "It's about theft and a broken contract of engagement." Roy, who had been silently observing from the porch steps, suddenly spoke up. "Speaking of contracts, Miss Elena's been keeping our books. Found some interesting discrepancies in that cattle sale contract you negotiated last year, Hawkins." Nathan's brow furrowed in confusion. "What discrepancies?" "Seems the buyer underpaid by nearly $500, Roy continued, winking almost imperceptibly at Elena. Miss Elena figured it out right away. "Real sharp with numbers, she is." Elena caught on immediately. "That's right. It was clearly noted in the original agreement, but the final payment didn't reflect the correct amount. I was going to show you the paperwork today, Nathan." Sheriff Mills stroked his mustache thoughtfully. $500, you say? Interesting coincidence. "Isn't it?" Nathan agreed, catching Elena's eye with the barest hint of a smile. "Almost as if the universe has a way of balancing accounts." Walsh looked between them suspiciously. "This is obviously a fabrication. There is no cattle contract." "Actually there is," said one of the neighboring ranchers. "I remember that sale. Big outfit from Helena, wasn't it, Hawkins? They bought your prime breeding stock." "That's right," Nathan confirmed smoothly. "And if there was an underpayment, as Miss Blackwood discovered, then it seems Silverleaf Ranch owes her a debt of gratitude, and potentially a finder's fee." Sheriff Mills' expression cleared, as if he'd just found an elegant solution to a vexing problem. "Well now, that would certainly complicate any claims about stolen funds, wouldn't it? If the lady is owed compensation of a similar amount." "This is outrageous." Walsh sputtered. "Sheriff, you can't possibly believe—" "What I believe, Mr. Walsh," Mills interrupted firmly, "is that settling private disputes from 2,000 miles away is beyond my jurisdiction. Miss Blackwood is clearly employed here legally, she's not being held against her will, and there's a legitimate financial claim that could offset any alleged theft." "Edward won't accept this," Walsh warned. his face reddening further. "He doesn't have to," Mills replied pragmatically. "But pursuing it would mean coming to Montana himself, filing formal charges, and submitting to the jurisdiction of our courts, which tend to take a dim view of outsiders trying to force local women into unwanted marriages." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her. The sheriff wasn't entirely on their side, but he clearly had no interest in inserting himself into what he saw as a personal dispute, especially one that might pit a Boston banker against the ranching community. "So you're just going to let her keep the stolen money?" Walsh demanded incredulously. "I'm going to let you and Mr. Prescott decide if it's worth pursuing," Mills corrected. "Given the complications Miss Blackwood's employment here presents, and the counterclaim regarding the cattle contract." Walsh turned to Elena, his expression cold. "Edward was right about you. You're nothing but a scheming—" "That's enough," Nathan cut in, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable warning. "You've had your say, Mr. Walsh. Now I suggest you ride back to town before my neighbors decide your presence here is no longer welcome." The Boston lawyer glanced around at the grim-faced ranchers, clearly sensing he'd lost this round. "This isn't over," he said, echoing Edward's favorite threat. "Mr. Prescott won't let this stand." "He's welcome to come see for himself," Nathan replied calmly. "But I'd advise him to bring more than a lawyer and borrowed authority when he does." With a final glare, Walsh wheeled his horse around and rode off down the path. After a moment's hesitation, Sheriff Mills tipped his hat to Elena. "Miss Blackwood, Mr. Hawkins, I trust this matter won't require my further attention." "Thank you, Sheriff," Nathan said sincerely. "We appreciate your practical approach to frontier justice." With a knowing nod, Mills and his deputies followed Walsh back toward town, leaving Elena, Nathan, and their impromptu defense committee standing in the early morning sunlight. "Well," said one of the neighboring ranchers, a grizzled man named Harlan, "that was more excitement than I usually get before breakfast. Think they'll be back?" "Not today," Nathan replied, watching the retreating figures. "But eventually? Perhaps." "We'll be ready if they do," Roy assured them, patting the rifle resting against the porch railing. As the neighbors dispersed with promises to spread word about any strangers asking questions, Elena turned to Nathan and Roy, overwhelmed with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you both," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "especially for that clever story about the cattle contract. I never expected—" "Who said it was just a story?" Roy interrupted with a wink. "I've been telling Hawkins for years he needs someone with a head for figures looking over those contracts." Nathan's expression was unreadable. "Go on inside, Roy. I need to speak with Elena." When the older man had disappeared into the house, Nathan guided Elena to the far end of the porch where they couldn't be overheard. Maple trotted after them, settling at Elena's feet. "There was no underpayment, was there?" Elena asked softly. "No," Nathan admitted, "though it's not impossible. My bookkeeping has been a mess for years." "Then why?" "Because Roy was right about one thing," Nathan interrupted gently. "Silverleaf does need someone with a head for figures. And more than that, He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I believe you, Elena. About Edward, about why you ran. And I wasn't about to let them drag you back to a man like that." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet conviction, broke something open in Elena's chest. Tears welled in her eyes as the full weight of the morning's events hit her. How close she'd come to being forced back to Boston, to Edward's control. "Hey now," Nathan said softly, his calloused fingers gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "It's over. You're safe. For now," Elena whispered. "But Walsh was right about one thing. Edward won't let this go. His pride won't allow it." "Then we'll be ready," Nathan promised. "Together." The word hung between them, filled with meaning that neither was quite ready to articulate. Instead, Elena picked up Maple, cradling the kid against her chest. "I should get breakfast started," she said, needing the normalcy of routine after the morning's drama. "The men will be hungry after their early ride." Nathan nodded, understanding her need to process everything that had happened. "I'll be in after I check on the horses." As Elena moved toward the kitchen, she heard him call her name. She turned, finding him still standing where she'd left him, an unfamiliar vulnerability in his expression. "I meant what I said to Walsh," Nathan told her, "about you being the best bookkeeper Silverleaf's ever had. But it's more than that. The ranch. It feels different with you here. Better." The simple admission warmed Elena more than any flowery declaration ever could. "It feels better to me, too," she replied softly. "Like I've finally found where I belong." Nathan's smile reached his eyes, crinkling the corners in that way that had become so dear to her. "Then I'm glad your map led you here, Elena Blackwood." Misleading as it was. As he strode toward the barn, Elena felt something settle within her, a certainty that, despite the lingering threat from Boston, she had indeed found her true destination. Not Willow Creek or any other settlement, but here at Silverleaf Ranch, with its quiet, principled owner and the life they were beginning to build together. The weeks that followed took on a rhythm that felt increasingly like permanence. Elena threw herself into managing Silverleaf's accounts, discovering that the ranch was actually more profitable than Nathan had realized. Years of haphazard bookkeeping had obscured the true financial picture, and Elena took satisfaction in bringing order to the chaos. Nathan, for his part, seemed to work with renewed purpose. He tackled long-neglected repairs around the ranch house, expanded the chicken coop, and even built a proper enclosure for Maple, who had grown plump and glossy under the Montana sun. "Never seen a goat with such a personality," Roy remarked one evening as they watched Maple prancing around her pen, showing off for the border collie. "Almost like she knows she brought you two together." Elena felt her cheeks warm at the implication. "We're employer and employee, Roy, nothing more." The old foreman snorted disbelievingly. "If you say so, Miss Elena. If you say so." But even Elena couldn't deny that something was shifting between her and Nathan. Their conversations over supper lingered longer each night. Their hands would brush when passing tools or dishes, the contact brief but electric. And sometimes she would look up from her work to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. Yet neither of them seemed ready to cross the invisible line that separated friendship from something deeper. The shadow of Boston, of Edward and his threats, still loomed in the background, an unresolved chapter that prevented Elena from fully embracing this new life. One afternoon, as summer began its gradual surrender to autumn, Elena was sorting through a crate of old ledgers in the ranch office when she came across a newspaper clipping tucked between the pages. It was yellowed with age, dated nearly 10 years earlier. The headline caught her eye: "Banking Heir Cleared in Fiancé's Death." With growing unease, Elena read the brief article. It described how Nathan Hawkins, son of prominent Chicago banker Harrison Hawkins, had been cleared of any wrongdoing in the tragic riding accident that had claimed the life of his fiancée, Lillian Moore. Despite initial suspicions due to reports of a heated argument witnessed hours before the accident, the investigation had determined Miss Moore's death to be accidental. Elena sat back, the clipping trembling in her hands. Nathan had been engaged before. His fiancée had died under circumstances initially considered suspicious, and he had never mentioned any of it. "Find something interesting?" Nathan's voice from the doorway made Elena jump. He stood watching her, his expression carefully neutral as he noticed the clipping in her hands. "I wasn't snooping," Elena began, then stopped herself. "Actually, perhaps I was." "I'm sorry." Nathan crossed the room slowly, taking the article from her. "I wondered if you'd ever find this," he said quietly. "Part of me hoped you wouldn't." "And the other part?" Elena asked, searching his face. "Knew you deserved to know. Especially after you trusted me with your story." He sank into the chair opposite her, the clipping lying between them on the desk like a challenge. "Ask what you want to know, Elena. I'll answer truthfully." Elena chose her words carefully. "Roy said you were running from something when you came west. Was this it?" Nathan nodded, his gaze distant. "Lillian was beautiful, accomplished, from a family that moved in the same circles as mine. Our engagement was practically arranged from childhood, the perfect merger of two banking families. Did you love her? The question slipped out before Elena could stop it. I thought I did, Nathan replied honestly. But looking back, I think I loved the idea of her, the life we were supposed to have. The reality was different. What happened? Elena asked softly. Nathan's fingers traced the edge of the clipping. Lillian had a secret. She was in love with someone else, her writing instructor. I discovered them together the day before the accident. Elena's heart clenched with sympathy. The argument the article mentions? Yes. I was hurt, angry, said things I regret. Nathan's voice grew rough with remembered pain. The next day, she went riding alone, something she never did. Her horse returned without her. They found her body at the bottom of a ravine. It truly was an accident? Elena couldn't help asking. Nathan met her gaze directly. Yes. But her family didn't want to believe that. They preferred to think I'd done something to her, rather than accept that their perfect daughter had been living a double life. When the investigation cleared me, they spread rumors anyway. Said I'd used my family's influence to escape justice. So you left Chicago, Elena concluded, understanding dawning. Ran from the rumors, just as I ran from Edward. The difference is, you ran towards something better, Nathan said with a sad smile. I just ran away. Came west, bought this land with my inheritance, cut all ties with my family and my past. Until now, Elena said softly, gesturing to the clipping. Why keep this? Why not destroy it? Nathan was quiet for a long moment, as a reminder, I suppose, of how quickly a life can unravel, of how the truth doesn't always matter when reputations are at stake. The parallel to her own situation with Edward was unmistakable. Elena reached across the desk, covering Nathan's hand with hers. Is that why you believed me about Edward? Why you were willing to help a stranger? Partly, Nathan admitted. I know what it's like to be judged unfairly, to have your character questioned by those who claim to know you best. His fingers interlaced with hers. But mostly, I believed you because I saw something in you that first day by the creek, a determination, a courage that resonated with me. And the baby goat didn't hurt my case, Elena added with a small smile, trying to lighten the moment. Nathan chuckled, the tension easing from his shoulders. Maple was certainly a convincing character witness. As their laughter faded, Elena realized they were still holding hands across the desk, the weathered newspaper clipping forgotten between them. In that moment, with their pasts laid bare, she felt closer to Nathan than she had to anyone in her life. Thank you for telling me, she said softly, for trusting me with your story. Thank you for not running when you read it, Nathan replied, his voice equally quiet. Most women would have. I'm not most women, Elena reminded him. And besides, my map led me here, remember? I've decided to trust its wisdom, misleading as it sometimes was. Something shifted in Nathan's expression, a warmth, a certainty that hadn't been there before. Elena, Whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats approaching the ranch at speed. They both rose, moving to the window to see Roy galloping toward the house, his expression urgent. Something's wrong, Nathan muttered, heading for the door with Elena close behind. They reached the porch, just as Roy reined in his horse, dust billowing around him. Riders coming, he panted. 6, maybe 7 of them. Peterson from the general store recognized one as that Boston lawyer, Walsh. But he's got hired guns with him this time, not the sheriff. Elena felt a chill of fear. Edward must have sent them. He's escalating. Nathan's expression hardened. How far out? Hour, maybe less, Roy replied grimly. I've sent word to the neighbors, but they might not get here in time. Nathan turned to Elena, his decision already made. "Get your things. You're leaving." "What? No!" Elena protested. "I'm not running again. You said yourself." "This is different," Nathan cut her off. "Walsh bringing hired guns changes everything. This isn't about legal claims anymore. They've come to take you by force. All the more reason I won't leave you and Roy to face them alone," Elena insisted. "This is my fight." "It's our fight," Nathan corrected, his voice softening. "But Elena, think of what they'll do if they catch you. Think of what Edward will do when he gets you back to Boston." The thought sent ice through her veins, but Elena stood her ground. "I won't be driven from another home, Nathan. I won't let fear dictate my choices again." Roy cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, but while you two are arguing, those riders are getting closer. Whatever we're doing, we need to decide fast." Nathan studied Elena's face, seeming to measure her resolve. Finally, he nodded. "All right. But we do this my way. We prepare for them, but we also prepare an escape route in case things go wrong." "Deal," Elena agreed, relief washing through her. The next hour passed in a flurry of activity. Roy and Nathan moved livestock to the far pastures, barricaded the approach to the ranch house, and positioned rifles at strategic points. Elena gathered supplies, packed saddlebags for a potential escape, and secured Maple in the barn where she would be safe from any conflict. As they worked, a plan took shape, not just for defense, but for a future beyond this immediate crisis. A future Elena was increasingly certain she wanted to share with Nathan, if they survived the coming confrontation. "Remember," Nathan instructed as they took their positions, "if I give the signal, you ride for the North Ridge. There's a cabin there where you can shelter until I come for you. And if you don't come?" Elena couldn't help asking, fear clutching at her heart. Nathan's eyes held hers, conveying everything they hadn't yet spoken aloud. "I'll come, Elena. Trust your map. It led you to Silverleaf for a reason." As the dust cloud on the horizon grew larger, signaling the approaching riders, Elena thought of the worn leather map that had brought her here. Not to Willow Creek and a homestead of her own, but to something she hadn't known she was seeking. A place where she was valued not for her family connections or marriage prospects, but for her intelligence, her determination, and her heart. "Stay, if it leads back here," Nathan had said that day on the hillside. Now, as they prepared to make their stand, Elena knew with absolute certainty that no matter what happened next, her path would always lead back to Silverleaf Ranch, to the place and the man who had helped her discover her true strength. The riders appeared on the final approach to the ranch house, silhouetted against the afternoon sun like harbingers of a coming storm. Elena gripped her Derringer pistol, ready to defend her newfound home alongside the man who had become so much more than an employer. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The riders approached Silverleaf Ranch in a tight formation, dust billowing behind them like storm clouds. Elena counted 7 men, George Walsh at the lead, flanked by 6 rough-looking individuals whose bearing identified them as hired guns rather than lawmen. "No sheriff this time," Nathan observed grimly from beside her. They were positioned inside the ranch house, watching through a window with a clear view of the approaching party. "Walsh has abandoned any pretense of legal authority." "Edward must be desperate," Elena murmured, her fingers tightening around her Derringer. "Or very, very angry." Roy appeared from the kitchen, a shotgun cradled in his weathered hands. "Neighbors are coming, but they won't get here for another hour at least. We're on our own till then." Nathan nodded, his expression resolute. "Remember the plan. We try to reason with them first. If that fails, we make it clear they're not welcome. And if they still push—" He left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. The riders reined in about 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a semicircle, a tactical position that sent a chill down Elena's spine. These men weren't just here to talk. "Nathan Hawkins!" Walsh called out, his Boston accent incongruous against the Montana landscape. "Send out Miss Blackwood, and we can resolve this matter peacefully." Nathan exchanged a glance with Elena, who nodded her agreement to the first stage of their plan. He stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but visibly at his side. "Mr. Walsh," he called back, "I thought the sheriff made it clear yesterday that Miss Blackwood is legally employed at Silverleaf Ranch. There's nothing to resolve." Walsh's laugh was unpleasant. "The sheriff's jurisdiction ends at the county line, Hawkins, and Mr. Prescott's patience has run out. He wants his fiancée and his property returned immediately." "Ex-fiancée," Elena stated firmly, stepping onto the porch beside Nathan, despite his warning glance. She would not hide while others fought her battles. "And as for the money, your employer knows perfectly well why I took it." Walsh's expression hardened. "This is your final opportunity to come voluntarily, Elena. Edward is prepared to forgive your indiscretions if you return now without further embarrassment." "And if I refuse?" Elena challenged, standing taller. "Then we have authorization to bring you back by whatever means necessary," Walsh replied coldly, "and to recover Mr. Prescott's funds from this establishment." One of the hired guns spat tobacco juice into the dirt, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. The message couldn't have been clearer. "7 against 3, Nathan observed, his voice carrying across the yard. "Not very sporting of you, Walsh." "This isn't about sport, Hawkins. It's about property rights." Walsh gestured dismissively toward Elena. "Mr. Prescott has a right to reclaim what's his." "I am not property," Elena's voice rang out, righteous anger overtaking fear.
"And I will not be treated as such by Edward or any man." A commotion from the barn interrupted the tense standoff. To Elena's horror, Maple had somehow escaped her enclosure and was trotting across the yard, bleating indignantly as if scolding the intruders for disturbing her afternoon. "Maple, no," Elena called, moving instinctively toward the kid. Everything happened at once. One of Walsh's men drew his pistol, either startled by the goat or seeing an opportunity in Elena's distraction. Nathan shoved Elena behind him, raising his rifle. Roy appeared at the corner of the porch, shotgun leveled. "Lower your weapon," Nathan commanded, his voice like steel. "Call off your men, Walsh," Roy added, his weathered fingers steady on the trigger. Walsh hesitated, glancing between his hired guns and the determined defenders on the porch. For a moment, it seemed the confrontation might be diffused. Then Maple, oblivious to the tension, butted playfully against the leg of the nearest rider's horse. The animal shied nervously, nearly unseating its rider, who cursed and aimed his pistol at the goat. "Don't!" Elena screamed, breaking free of Nathan's protection and rushing down the porch steps. A shot cracked across the yard. Elena froze, certain that Maple had been hit, but the kid merely bleated in alarm and scampered toward her. Instead, it was one of Walsh's men who cried out, clutching his shoulder as blood blossomed across his shirt. Elena whirled to see Nathan lowering his rifle, his face grim. "That was a warning," he called out. "The next one won't be." Chaos erupted. Walsh's men drew their weapons, firing wildly toward the house. Nathan pulled Elena back toward the porch, shielding her with his body as bullets splintered the wooden railing around them. "Get inside!" he shouted, returning fire with measured precision. Roy's shotgun boomed, scattering another of the attackers. "Take her to the back, boss! I'll hold them here!" Elena clutched Maple to her chest, her heart pounding as Nathan hustled her through the house toward the rear door. Behind them, the exchange of gunfire continued, punctuated by shouts and the frightened whinnying of horses. "We need to get to the North Ridge," Nathan said urgently, checking his rifle as they paused in the kitchen. "The cabin there is defensible, and the neighbors will know to look for us there." "What about Roy?" Elena asked, reluctant to leave the loyal foreman behind. "Roy knows the plan. He'll follow when he can." Nathan's expression was torn between concern for his friend and the need to get Elena to safety. "We don't have a choice, Elena. Walsh's men weren't expecting resistance, but they'll regroup quickly." A bullet shattered the kitchen window, sending glass flying across the room. Nathan pulled Elena lower, shielding both her and Maple from the debris. "We have to go, now." Elena nodded, clutching the kid tighter. "Lead the way. They slipped out the back door and hurried toward the stable where their horses were already saddled and waiting, part of the escape plan they'd prepared. Nathan helped Elena mount, passing Maple up to her before swinging onto his own horse. "Stay close," he instructed as they urged their mounts toward a back trail that wound away from the main approach to the ranch. "And keep low in the saddle." They had just reached the tree line when another volley of shots rang out from the direction of the house. Elena looked back, her heart in her throat, in time to see Roy emerge from the side door, firing his shotgun one-handed as he limped toward the barn. "He's hurt," she cried, pulling on her reins. "We can't go back," Nathan said grimly, though his expression revealed how much it cost him to continue riding. "If we're captured, his sacrifice means nothing. The best thing we can do for Roy is get to the ridge and bring back help." Elena knew he was right, but leaving felt like cowardice, like running away all over again. "I'm tired of running, Nathan." "This isn't running," he corrected her, his eyes meeting hers with fierce intensity. "This is tactical retreat. There's a difference." As if to emphasize his point, shots kicked up dirt nearby as several of Walsh's men spotted their escape and gave chase. Nathan returned fire, buying them precious seconds to plunge deeper into the forest that bordered Silverleaf's northern boundary. The trail narrowed, forcing them to ride single file through dense pines. Elena clutched Maple with one arm, the other hand white-knuckled on the reins as they climbed steadily higher into the foothills. Behind them, she could hear the pursuit, men crashing.
Through undergrowth, occasional shots fired blindly into the trees. "They don't know these woods," Nathan assured her during a brief pause to rest the horses. "We do. That's our advantage." Elena nodded, trying to draw strength from his confidence. Maple, remarkably calm despite the circumstances, nuzzled against her as if offering comfort. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered to the kid. "I never meant to bring this danger to you, or to Nathan and Roy." "Don't apologize," Nathan said, overhearing her. "You didn't create this situation, Edward did. Men like him, they can't stand losing what they see as theirs." His expression darkened. "I've known that type my entire life." "Your father?" Elena guessed, recalling the newspaper clipping that had mentioned Nathan's banker father. "My father, Edward Walsh, cut from the same cloth," Nathan confirmed. "Men who believe their wealth and position entitle them to whatever they want, whoever they want." The sound of approaching riders interrupted their conversation. Nathan quickly helped Elena remount, and they continued their ascent, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous with each passing mile. By late afternoon, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley. Silverleaf Ranch was visible in the distance, a collection of buildings nestled against the backdrop of golden plains. There was no smoke, no sign of fire, which Elena took as a hopeful sign. "The cabin's just ahead," Nathan said, pointing to a small clearing where a sturdy log structure stood partially concealed by surrounding pines. "My father built it as a hunting lodge before—" He trailed off, then shook his head. "Before I cut ties with my past." As they approached the cabin, Elena noticed signs that it was occasionally used. The path was relatively clear, the small stable beside it in good repair. Inside they found basic provisions, a stone fireplace, and simple furnishings, including a narrow bed and a rough-hewn table with chairs. "It's not much," Nathan apologized, helping Elena down from her horse. "But it's solid, and the approach is easy to defend." "It's perfect," Elena assured him, setting Maple down to explore the single room. The kid immediately began investigating corners, seemingly unfazed by their dramatic flight. Nathan secured the horses in the small stable, then returned to help Elena barricade the cabin's single door and 2 windows. By the time they finished, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. "Do you think they're still following?" Elena asked, peering through a narrow gap in the window covering. "Probably," Nathan replied honestly. "But they won't try the ascent in darkness." These trails are treacherous even in daylight if you don't know them. And Roy? She couldn't keep the worry from her voice. Nathan's expression was troubled. Roy's smart and tough. If he could get away, he would have. If not, Walsh would take him prisoner. Elena finished the thought. To use as leverage against us. Which is why we need to be ready. Nathan agreed, checking his rifle and the extra ammunition he'd brought. They'll come at dawn, most likely. As night fell, the cabin grew cold despite the small fire Nathan had carefully built in the fireplace. Large enough for warmth, but not so large as to send obvious smoke signals to their pursuers. They shared the meager provisions they'd brought in their saddlebags, feeding Maple scraps of dried apple that the kid accepted with appreciative bleats. "What happens if they find us?" Elena asked finally, voicing the question that had been haunting her since their flight from the ranch. Nathan was silent for a long moment, his face half illuminated by the flickering firelight. "I won't let them take you back to Edward," he said finally. "Whatever it takes." The quiet conviction in his voice brought tears to Elena's eyes. "I've brought nothing but trouble since I arrived at Silverleaf. Your home invaded, Roy injured, your life threatened, all because of me." "No," Nathan said firmly, moving to sit beside her on the rough bench. "All because a man in Boston couldn't accept that a woman might prefer freedom to his cage, no matter how gilded." He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against hers. "You brought life back to Silverleaf, Elena. Before you arrived with your misleading map and this ridiculous goat." Maple looked up indignantly at being described as ridiculous, then returned to investigating a knothole in the floorboards. "The ranch was just a place I was hiding," Nathan continued. "Not living, just existing. You reminded me there could be more." The emotion in his voice, the tenderness in his touch, broke through the last of Elena's reserves. "I was running when I came to Montana," she admitted softly, "running from Edward, from the life others had planned for me. I never expected to find something worth staying for, worth fighting for." "And have you?" Nathan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Found something worth fighting for?" Elena met his gaze directly, allowing him to see the truth in her eyes. "I've found someone worth fighting for, worth living for." The confession hung between them for a heartbeat before Nathan's free hand came up to cradle her cheek. "Elena Blackwood," he murmured, "your map may have been misleading, but it led you exactly where you needed to be." When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home after a long journey. Not the false home she'd nearly accepted in Boston, but the true belonging she'd found in this wild country, with this honorable man. The kiss deepened, months of unspoken feelings finally finding expression. Elena's arms wound around Nathan's neck, drawing him closer as the fire crackled and Maple bleated softly in the background, a domestic witness to this moment of connection. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "When this is over," he promised, "when we've dealt with Walsh and his men, I want to build a life with you, Elena, if that's what you want too." "It is," she whispered, the certainty in her heart absolute, more than anything. They spent the night taking turns on watch, always alert for any sign of their pursuers. During her shift, Elena sat by the window, Maple curled at her feet, and reflected on the twisting path that had brought her to this moment. The life she'd nearly accepted in Boston now seemed like a pale imitation of living, a script written by others with no room for her true self. Here in Montana, despite the danger and uncertainty, she felt fully alive for the first time. The challenges she faced were real, not the artificial constraints of society, and she faced them not alone, but alongside a man who saw her strength rather than seeking to diminish it. Dawn broke with ominous quiet, the forest around the cabin unnaturally still. Nathan, who had taken the last watch, motioned for Elena to join him at the window. "They're out there," he whispered. "At least 3 of them, using the trees for cover." Elena peered through the gap in the shutters, her heart racing as she caught glimpses of movement among the pines. "What do we do?" "Wait," Nathan replied, his expression calm despite the danger. "They don't know the terrain. We do. Let them make the first move." They didn't have to wait long. A voice called out from the tree line, not Walsh's cultured Boston accent, but a rougher tone. "Hawkins, we know you're in there. Send out the woman and the money, and maybe we'll let you live." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Charming negotiation tactics," he muttered. "No sign of Walsh," Elena observed, scanning the visible portions of the forest. "Probably waiting safely in the background while his hired guns do the dirty work," Nathan agreed. He raised his voice to call back. "The lady stays with me. If you're smart, you'll ride back to town and tell Walsh his employer's money isn't worth dying for." The answer came in the form of gunfire, bullets thudding into the solid log walls of the cabin. Nathan pulled Elena away from the window, shielding her as splinters flew. "So much for negotiation," he grimaced. "They'll likely try to rush us after softening us up with gunfire. When they do, I'll create a diversion. You take Maple and slip out the back, down the eastern trail we passed on the way up." "I'm not leaving you," Elena protested, clutching his arm. "Elena," Nathan's voice was gentle but firm, "if they capture both of us, there's no one left to bring help. The eastern trail leads to the Carson homestead. They'll help you." Before she could argue further, a crash from the rear of the cabin announced a new threat. Someone had reached the back window and was attempting to break through the barricade they'd erected. Nathan spun, firing a measured shot through the wooden slats. A cry of pain confirmed he'd hit his target, but the momentary victory was short-lived as more gunfire peppered the front of the cabin. "They're coordinating their attack," Nathan said grimly, reloading. "Trying to divide our attention." A new sound rose above the gunfire, the thundering of hooves approaching fast from the direction of the ranch. Elena's heart sank, thinking Walsh had brought reinforcements, but Nathan's expression transformed into one of hope. "Listen," he urged her, "that's not just a few riders. That's a whole lot of neighborly concern," boomed a familiar voice outside. "Walsh, call off your dogs, or we start shooting." Elena rushed to the window, relief flooding through her as she saw the scene unfolding in the clearing. At least a dozen mounted men surrounded Walsh's hired guns, rifles trained on the now outnumbered attackers. And at their head, looking battered but very much alive, sat Roy atop his favorite mare. "Roy!" Nathan called out, joy evident in his voice. "You're a sight for sore eyes." "Couldn't let you have all the fun, boss," Roy called back, grinning despite a bloodied bandage on his arm. "Besides, these boys were mighty upset to hear about outsiders shooting up one of their neighbors." Walsh emerged from the trees, his fine clothes dirty and torn, his expression furious. "This is a private matter between Mr. Prescott and his fiancée. You have no right to interfere." One of the neighboring ranchers, a bear of a man named Harlan, spat contemptuously. "Private matter, my eye. Armed men attacking a homestead and driving folks into the hills? That's everyone's business out here, mister." Nathan unbarred the cabin door, his rifle still ready but his posture relaxed. "It's over, Walsh. Your hired guns are outnumbered, and the sheriff won't look kindly on this little expedition of yours." Walsh's face contorted with rage and frustration. "Edward Prescott is not a man to be crossed. He has connections, influence." "In Boston, maybe," Roy interrupted, "but this is Montana territory. Different rules apply." Elena stepped out of the cabin, Maple trotting faithfully at her heels. The morning sunlight bathed the clearing in golden light, transforming the scene of potential bloodshed into one of unexpected victory. "Tell Edward," she said clearly, meeting Walsh's defeated gaze, "that I've found where I belong. The money is compensation for the future he tried to steal from me. If he pursues this further, I'll ensure every society matron in Boston knows exactly what kind of man he is." Walsh glared at her, then at Nathan, who had moved protectively to her side. "This isn't over," he snarled, falling back on his employer's favorite threat. "Yes, Nathan countered firmly, his arms sliding around Elena's waist. It is. Under the watchful eyes of the Montana ranchers, Walsh and his remaining men were disarmed and escorted down the mountain. 2 of the neighbors volunteered to take them all the way to the territorial border, with clear instructions never to return. As the procession disappeared down the trail, Elena turned to Nathan, emotion overwhelming her. "I thought we might die up here." "Not a chance," he replied, pulling her close. "I had too much to live for." His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. "Still do." Roy cleared his throat loudly, reminding them of their audience. "Not to interrupt this touching reunion, but there's a ranch waiting for us down below. And if I'm not mistaken, we've got a wedding to plan." Elena blushed, looking questioningly at Nathan. "Wedding?" Nathan's smile was both tender and mischievous. "Well, I did promise Roy I'd make an honest woman of you if we survived this mess." His expression grew serious. "That is, if you'll have me, Elena Blackwood. Not as your employer, but as your partner in all things." Before all the assembled neighbors, and with Maple watching attentively from the cabin doorway, Elena rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to his in answer. The cheers and whistles of the Montana ranchers echoed through the pines, a joyful sound to replace the earlier gunfire. 3 weeks later, Elena stood on the porch of Silverleaf Ranch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. The repairs to the ranch house were complete, erasing most signs of Walsh's attack. Roy's arm was healing well, and the neighbors had pitched in to help with the cattle while he recuperated. Maple, now sporting a blue ribbon around her neck, grazed contentedly in her enclosure, seemingly untroubled by the memories of their flight to the ridge cabin. The kid had become something of a local celebrity, with neighbors often bringing treats when they visited, a far cry from her threatened fate in Boston. The sound of bootsteps on the porch announced Nathan's approach. He slipped his arms around Elena from behind, and she leaned back against his chest, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, nodding toward the simple gold band that now graced her finger. They had married the previous day in a ceremony attended by half the county, with Maple serving as an unconventional maid of honor. "Not one," Elena replied, truthfully, turning in his arms to face him. "Though I do wonder sometimes." "About what?" Nathan prompted when she hesitated. Elena smiled, touching his cheek gently. "About that misleading map. How something so wrong could lead me somewhere so right." Nathan captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Perhaps it wasn't misleading after all. Perhaps it knew exactly where you needed to go, even if that wasn't where you thought you wanted to be." "Stay, if it leads back here," Elena quoted softly, remembering his words from that day on the hillside. "I'm glad I did." "So am I, Mrs. Hawkins," Nathan murmured, lowering his lips to hers as the last rays of sunlight gilded Silverleaf Ranch. No longer just a place of hiding, but a true home for both of them. And at their feet, contentedly chewing on a wildflower, Maple bleated her approval of this unexpected happy ending that had begun with a desperate flight, a misleading map, and a baby goat who had helped 2 wounded souls find their way home to each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.